Start. Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Manny here once again, and welcome to DFS Zone. And got a brand new video for you. Our first NFL video here at DFS Zone for the year. Sorry it's coming to you a little late. Had a lot of busy time in the last few days, but I'm glad that still nonetheless, hey, better late than not doing one at all. I do have my WNBA followers out there, my viewers. I had promised Wednesday, and I apologize. It is out here today. We will still have the live show tomorrow, beginning tomorrow, 7 p.m. Man, tune in. So you must subscribe to the channel. Make sure you put on those post notifications, and of course, you got to drop a like on the video. But before I start going over the actual slate and actually bet, what are you gonna get here? I know there's a lot of new viewers out there, and what you are to expect from DFS Zone. One thing is for certain, and I can just totally be honest, and my WNBA followers will know, I'm always going to give you options. I'm not going to be one of those, you're never going to get 6 or 7 top plays and that's it and leave you off and running. I am going to do, in the NFL as well as in the NBA and WNBA, I always give people multiple plays. So you're going to get at least 2 or 3 plays, possibly even a sleeper play, a value play per position in the NFL every single week. That is for certain. That is guaranteed. And the reason I do that, folks, is because not everybody's the same. I love GPP. I'm more of a risk. My risk tolerance is higher. There's people that are just basically only have a small bankroll. If you have a small bankroll, you don't definitely want to play a lot of GPPs. You want to try to build that bankroll up. So those individuals are catered to playing 50-50s, double ups, and maybe even head-to-heads. So it's a totally different it's a totally different animal when you're comparing players with bankrolls. So you can't go and give somebody 6 or 7 plays and then hope that that works out and pans out. You want to have somebody that's going to give you good statistical data information, give you the best possible information for you to be able to be successful, and at the same time give you options. Now with 2 or 3 or possibly 4 plays per position, you are able now to, if you are on FanDuel or on DraftKings, you have the option to use either one of the 2 platforms. I happen to play in both. I'm more a FanDuel player than DK, but I do play NFL on both FanDuel and on DK. So one thing for certain, for those who are not familiar, FanDuel and DK are 2 separate platforms, and both platforms have different price ranges for players as well as different point totals for the scoring. So the scoring is slightly different as well. So you got to take that into consideration. So when you're looking at the players I give you, I'm giving you an option now. You could utilize that player either on FanDuel or DraftKings, wherever it makes best sense for you. Okay, as opposed to just having those 7 or 8 players and not sure, oh man, they're too pricey on FanDuel or they're too pricey on DK. Now you at least have some options. You can utilize both, or you can actually say, hey, you know what? I've done it several times. You can just say, I'm not going to play FanDuel. The numbers look better as far as players are concerned here at DK. I'm just going to play DK. I'm going to fade FanDuel this week, or vice versa. Or you can play them both if you can squeeze them in, of course, on top of whatever other information you are getting from on the internet or your own research. But this channel is based on those individuals that are new, and this channel is also based on individuals that don't have the time to do the research. I have the time, and this is just the way I am. What you're getting as far as plays are players that I am considering myself. This is not about I'm making players up, giving them to you just to do a video, and then in turn I'm not using any one of these players. Absolutely not. I am basically giving you the information that I have researched myself for several hours, and I have actually said to myself, I'm going to share this with my viewers. So that's what you're basically getting out of me. I hope it's not too lengthy, but I wanted to make that clear. So I know there's a lot of new viewers, and they've never seen my channel before. So if you're new to the channel, welcome aboard. Let's build a nice community. I build a great community with some NBA people. I build a nice community over the course of the entire WNBA season. And now it's time to do some NFL, and I'm looking forward to this. My 5th, I'm here 5.5 months with the channel. I'm truly excited, and I want to continue to help you people out. And football and NBA are my best sports. So I feel very, very good and confident that I can help those who really need it. So if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so down below, and do not forget to put on those post notifications, because you're going to get videos on a regular basis, and the live show is tomorrow, and you don't want to miss that. Tomorrow's show is at 7 p.m. right here on DFS Zone on YouTube. All right, so let's dive right in, man. So at quarterback, we're going to start off with the quarterbacks, and to be totally honest with you, man, it's always tough, but I'm not one of those that pays up for quarterback pretty much throughout the season. I'm going to be honest with you. There's nothing wrong with paying up for a quarterback. I'm more comfortable paying up for a quarterback, especially in a smaller slate. 2 games, maybe the 4 p.m. if there's only 3 or 4 games, the Sunday, Monday slate, or the Monday, Thursday slate, something like that. If you need to pay up for a quarterback, and you know what, even if he's a bit chalky, I'm okay with that. I do it myself several times, but on a small slate. Huge slate like this, you got to find yourself a nice quarterback that's capable of getting you some good fantasy points, and at the same time is not too pricey. So Tom Brady, excellent play, no doubt about it. I mean, I'm just fading him because I'd rather not pay $8,600 for him. Drew Brees is my first player that I'm going to give you guys. I think Drew Brees is in a fine position here. $8,400, pretty pricey, but Drew Brees has, he is capable of having some great numbers. He's $8,400 here, and for those who play DK, he's $6,800 over there. I think that's a pretty good price considering that he's $84 here on FanDuel. But Drew Brees coming in last year in 2017, he had a 72% completion ratio. He threw up, he had 386 completions, 4,334 yards. He threw 23 touchdowns. That's actually a downer for him, but that's obviously expected due to the fact of the success of Ingram and, of course, the rookie sensation, Mr. Kamara. They put up a lot of touchdowns themselves, so that obviously brought down the touchdown percentages for Mr. Drew Brees. But again, with no Mark Ingram starting off the year and just Mr. Kamara in the backfield, I could see Drew Brees definitely throwing a couple more touchdowns very early on here in the beginning of the year. He only threw 8 interceptions last year. So and that was pretty much, his average was about 270 yards per game. He actually played 2 games against Tampa Bay and pretty much lit them up. I mean, 2 games against Tampa, these were his total numbers, 44 of 57. 44 of 57, folks. That is incredible. 73% completion ratio in game 2. In game 1, 81%. He threw for 249 yards and 1 touchdown in the last game and 263 yards and 2 touchdowns in game 1. So that's a 44 for 57 with 517 yards and 3 TDs. His home-away splits were pretty good at home. He was excellent, 71% completion ratio, 294 yards passing on average at home with 14 TDs and 5 interceptions. Interceptions are a little high, but he had a quarterback rating of 101.6. They also put in about 18 and a half fantasy points per game, and that was above his average. As you can see here, his average was 16.9, pretty much 17. But as you see here, he can get you 20 or better, and I always love to see that. When I look at fantasy points per game, I want to see if he's at least meeting that or exceeding it. Obviously, we always want to exceed to get value, so anybody who exceeds value, we definitely want to have a shot at it. So he's 17 points average, and he basically had 6 games last year pretty much where you got 20 or better. So he has 20-point upside, capable of getting you 25 on the high range. He's definitely someone in play. Okay, in the red zone, Drew Brees was fantastic. 66.5% completion ratio with 17 touchdowns. That was in the top 10 in the league in the red zone. Okay, so when he gets to the red zone, he is very dangerous. Only had 2 interceptions there. Inside the 10, it's just as effective, 66% completion ratio. He had 85 yards passing with 12 TDs. So that means out of the 17 TDs inside the 20, 12 of them were inside the 10. So a lot of success. And and I feel that he's going to do well. Why? Because Tampa Bay was horrible defending the pass last year. Last year, Tampa Bay was dead last in defense, in pass defense, giving up 261 yards a game. And this man put up 294 a game at home. So it spells a lot of disaster for Tampa Bay, and they didn't do a whole lot to improve their defense. They also gave up to the opposition 22 touchdowns, 67% quarterback rate against them. In the red zone, not too good either, 55% rate. The opponents scored 55% of the time in the red zone. They scored at least a touchdown. So just those numbers alone, and knowing that he has the upside, automatically leads me to just, out of all the guys here, obviously between the 2 studs, I love him in this position. I think Drew Brees is definitely a fine play. Again, here, you got some guys here. Deshaun Watson. I love Deshaun Watson. I'm a big college guy. I watched him through college. This guy is a winner. He's a great ball player. Devastating injury last year. Had this team rolling. I think they're going to do fine here. I think he's someone you guys can consider. I'm not on him. I'm trying to give you the best possible plays. It's going to be definitely a shootout between him and Brady in this game. So definitely either one of them will be fine. What I love best about Deshaun Watson at this 8,200 price is that he's a dual threat quarterback, and I love dual threat quarterbacks. This guy's capable of beating you with his arm and with his feet. And when you have those kind of quarterbacks, I mean, there's a few of them in this league and a few of them playing. Guys like Russell Wilson, not only Deshaun, you have Cam Newton, you have Marcus Mariota, you got Tyrod Taylor, and then you got the new kid who just is going to start for the full entire season for Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes. These guys are all dual threat quarterbacks, very, very dangerous, kind of quarterbacks you always want to try to gauge yourself on simply because of all the upside they have. If they're not able to throw the ball effectively, you're going to gain fantasy points from them running. And if they're running and they are very good, especially in the red zone where they can actually use their feet to get in the end zone and score touchdowns, now you're getting the benefits of both worlds. I just love it. They expand, it just opens up the offense a little bit better. Definitely puts a lot of pressure on the defense. So something to consider there for those of you who are fairly new. Definitely, if you can get a dual threat quarterback, absolutely love them. If you can get one at a good price, I would say you definitely should land one. So, but Deshaun Watson, my next guy really that I like, and I got 3 quarterbacks that I like going into the matchups on Sunday. My next guy here is Andy Dalton. I love Andy Dalton against Indianapolis here. 6,800, not too bad. On DraftKings, he's 5,800, so he's 1,000 cheaper there. His 2017 stats, 60% completion ratio, had 297 completions out of 496 attempts. 3,320 passing yards, 25 touchdowns. He did have 12 interceptions. It's pretty high. He had a quarterback rating of 86.6, and he averaged 207.4 yards per game. Last year, they did play against Indy. He had 17 for 29 game there, 243 yards with 2 touchdowns. He did have also 3 rushing carries for 10 yards. He put up 18.7 fantasy points during that game, which is not at all bad at all. His home away splits, they are on the road going to Indy. He had 61% completion ratio last year on the road, 1,528 yards, averaged 191 yards per game. Not too bad, just slightly under 200, but did have 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and his quarterback rating was 96.7, which is pretty good. What I also like is that his fantasy point totals, as you can see here, is 13.9. And he pretty much obviously had a quarter. His average was about 15.5 last year when this is all totaled up. 15.5 away on the road, and that's above his average of 13.9. Again, I always look to see if they're at least at average or above. Obviously, if they're above, it's more of a check mark for me, and then I move on and I look into some more information. So he also rushed 18 times for 36 yards on the road, and like I said, 15 to 16 fantasy points. And the beauty of it is that he's capable of getting you 16 to 18. I mean, if you look here, his numbers, you got some 19s, some 18s, so he's capable of getting you 16 to 18 fantasy points. All right, so he has a little bit of an upside, and he did have 7 games where he had at least 15 or more, which is above his average. So definitely some good numbers for Andy Dalton. I also like his numbers in the red zone. Check out these numbers. In the inside of 20, 30 of 57, 194 yards, 48% completion ratio, but he had 18 touchdowns. That was in the top 6 in the league as a quarterback. 18 touchdowns in the red zone. So when this guy gets in the red zone, he makes things happen. 1 interception. That is a fantastic ratio for 57 passes in the red zone. Okay, inside the 10, just as good. 17 of 26, 59%. Jumped up a whole 11% inside the 10, 14 touchdowns. So out of the 18 touchdowns within the 20-yard zone, he in the 10-yard line or better, he put 14 up. With still that 1 interception for 84 yards. I mean, this is fantastic. These numbers is 18 and 14 in the red zone are actually better than Drew Brees. So I definitely like Andy Dalton here. He's in a good matchup. Indianapolis came in 28th in the league in defense last year. They gave up 247 yards per game. They also coughed up 23 touchdowns to the opposition. That was they're not a good pass rushing team, so that definitely helps Andy Dalton. They were second to last in sacks last year, so very, very critical point to remember there. Quarterback, as far as he rushed 55 yards. The quarterbacks rushed 55 times for 199 yards and 3 TDs against Indy last year. Fantasy points to quarterbacks last year on DK averaged 19 fantasy points per game on DK and 17.8 on FanDuel. So definitely something to consider here, and that is actually above his average. Another check mark. One of the reasons why that maybe he may be a possible 16 to 17 fantasy point play this week. Red zone opposition, Indianapolis didn't do that well there either. 53% of the time the opponent got into the red zone, they actually scored at least a touchdown. So just with that, I definitely love Andy Dalton. I think Andy Dalton will be a nice play at 6,800. Favorable matchup against Indianapolis. My next quarterback that I'm looking at that I think is a fine play, Mahomes and Tyrod Taylor are definitely in play for me. I will probably even touch more on them in tomorrow's live show, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to look at them a little bit more, but I like them because they are the type of quarterbacks that I enjoy watching, and not only that, I enjoy putting in my fantasy lineups. They are those dual threat quarterbacks. But I love Blake Bortles here at 6,600. He is my third quarterback that I'm going to discuss. I think he's a great play tomorrow, man. He's at 6,600. He's at 5,600 on DK. Last year, he had 315 completions out of 523 attempts, 60% quarterback rating, completion, excuse me. It's 3,687 yards. He threw 21 touchdowns. He did cough up 13 big interceptions, which I do not like. But he averaged 230 yards per game, and he had a quarterback rating of 84.7. His home and away splits not too bad. 172 out of 305 passes, 56% completion ratio, 205 yards, 8 TDs, and a quarterback rating of 74.9. He did rush for 35 rushes for 210 yards, averaged 6 yards a rush, which is not too bad, and actually even scored 2 touchdowns. All right. What I like also about Blake Bortles is that he played so well in the playoffs after being so dreadful early on in the year. He really came on strong, and he's in a good team here. This is a team that should do well, should be in the playoffs, and should actually get pretty far. But he averaged 14.5 fantasy points, on the road last year. And look at these numbers. I mean, granted, he had finished the year with 15s and 16s, but overall, 14.5, 15 fantasy points per game on the road, and he averaged 16 for the season. So that, again, is just slightly below his average, but he's capable of, as you can see here, he's capable of getting you 20 or better. He did that 5 times during the course of last year. So he has a little bit of upside. Not huge upside, but he definitely has some upside to be, and he's going up against a team that's really not that good defensively. Love him in the red zone, man. In the red zone, Blake Bortles was absolutely fantastic last year. 32 of 60 inside the 20, 51% completion ratio, 250 yards, 18 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. None. 18 TDs. That was in the top 5 as far as quarterbacks in the red zone. Blake Bortles had a fantastic time in the red zone. Inside the 10, 19 of 31, 61%. His completion percentage went up 10%. Inside the 10, 111 yards passing, 14 touchdowns. So out of the 18, 14 of them were inside the 10. 0 touchdowns still, of course. And I assure you, he had 2 rushing TDs. Obviously, 2 out of those 14 were him running them with his own feet. When he's capable of getting in, he is not afraid to do it. And that's another thing also. He's a little tough guy to me. Blake Bortles definitely in play for me. Going up against the Giants, who were horrific last year defending against the pass. The Giants were 31st, second to last in the league in the NFL in pass defense. 252 yards given up to their opponents, and 32 touchdowns. 32 touchdowns, folks. 32 touchdowns was the worst in the NFL. The Giants were worse in the NFL. That was the most in the NFL. Quarterback rushed them 51 rushes for 173 yards, and they had 2 touchdowns against them as well. And you got a quarterback here like Blake Bortles, who was very efficient, very good in the red zone, and is willing to run in and get in the end zone himself. That could spell some recipe for disaster for the Giants as well. DK fantasy points to quarterbacks. The Giants are whopping 20.4 points per game given up to quarterbacks last year. That was second most in the NFL as far as DK points. And in FanDuel, 19.4 fantasy points. And that was the most on FanDuel in the NFL against quarterbacks. So Blake Bortles definitely in a favorable position tomorrow. Some good worthy mentions here as far as quarterbacks are concerned. I definitely like Phillip Rivers also. here going up against Kansas City. Granted, he did not play well against Kansas City last year. I mean, Kansas City had his number, but I think he's someone that you can consider here as well in Sunday's slate. Other than the other two that I mentioned, I also like Case Keenum here as well. Case Keenum will be someone that everyone should definitely take a look at as well. So I will touch base more on Case Keenum. I like the fact that Case Keenum is going into a team where, man, he had a fantastic year last year with Minnesota in a playoff situation. He comes in with a lot of experience. He's confident. I think he's obviously a better quarterback now than he was years ago. He's coming into a pretty good situation with Denver, too. They needed a quarterback. Denver hasn't had a steady, good, accurate, consistent, healthy quarterback in years, all right? And we're talking about Peyton Manning time. So it's been quite a while for Denver. I'm sure they're very happy to have Case Keenum. He's going up there. He's got himself Mr. Sanders and Mr. Thomas. He's got two good weapons there. I don't know more or less if he's going to do well with the tight end, which is fairly young. Got a nice little decent backfield. He's still got Devontae Booker back there, but I see the young kid Royce Freeman possibly being a good play for him, a good backfield mate. So we'll see how that pans out. But Case Keenum, I'll probably have some more information on him for tomorrow's live show at 7 p.m. But that's what those are the three quarterbacks I like, and a couple of ones that I think that are worth looking at, as I mentioned before. And running back, we're going to get to running back. Obviously, here in the top, Le'Veon Bell, man, it's just a shame, you know. It's just terrible. He's one of the best backs in the NFL to have contract disputes and put Pittsburgh in this position. I mean, it's horrible. So there's no Bell there. Alvin Kamara, man, sophomore year. He had an incredible rookie season. I love Alvin Kamara tomorrow. I'm sure a lot of you do. He's in a favorable spot, too, Tampa Bay. So, I mean, he comes in 8,700. He's the first back I'm going to discuss. 8,700 on DK is 8,500, so it's only $200 cheaper. His rookie season stats: 120 rushes, 720 yards, 8 TDs, 6 yards per carry. He did have 81 receptions as well for 826 yards, so he actually had more receiving yards in total over rushing yards. He did have 5 TDs there as well. 13 total touchdowns for the year. He was 81%. His 81% clutch rate. It was unbelievable as a running back and receiver combined. It was just an incredible year for him. Inside the red zone, 20-yard line, the guy had 25 rushes, 112 yards, 6 TDs. 6 TDs. Inside the 10-yard line, 13 rushes, 41 yards, 5 touchdowns. So out of the 6 touchdowns, 5 of them obviously were within the 10. He had a 32% rushing percentage there. He did play against his team twice last year, and his stat line versus Tampa Bay: 9 rushes in the last game, 44 yards, 1 touchdown. He has 6 receptions, 84 yards, okay, for combined 28 to 29 fantasy points combined in that game. In game 1, 10 rushes, 68 yards, 1 touchdown, 6 receptions, 84 yards again. Imagine that. He got both games, 6 receptions, 84 yards on the nose, and then he put up 31 fantasy points in that game. I mean, it's very explosive. His home-away splits: at home, they're playing at home, 80 rushes, 375 yards, 5 touchdowns. He also had 40 receptions for 448 yards and 3 TDs. He averaged about 19 to 20 fantasy points per game, which exceeds his value, as you can see here, at 17.5 fantasy points per game. So that's definitely a nice little check mark for me there. He also has, as you can see, he's capable of getting you 25 or better. So he has nice upside, capable of having an explosive game. He did 20 or better 7 times last year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7 times he had 20 fantasy points or better, and he also crushed 30 one time. So I mean, he is very dangerous. He's going to be in a great position with no Ingram. Obviously, he's going to get a lot of touches with the football. You definitely get targets, and you get opportunity to run the ball as well. Dual threat, could run between the tackles so well. Can even make his own, create his own hole, find his own hole. At the same time, he's very explosive on the flats. He's just incredible. He's a good check down receiver. I mean, man, he's just awesome to see, man. So Alvin Kamara definitely is my first guy there. He's going up against Tampa Bay, man. Like I said, Tampa Bay 23rd in rushing defense last year. Not too good there, giving up 117.5 yards per game against the opposition. Also gave up 15 touchdowns to running backs. They also coughed up 86 receptions to running backs for 759 yards. Incredible. 3 TDs. Fantasy FanDuel points, 23.4 FanDuel points given up to running backs throughout the year. Those are horrible numbers, folks. DK, 27. 27 fantasy points to running backs last year, and this guy is an explosive running back who can get you 27 or better. I could see him having an electrifying game here. Red zone defense, Tampa Bay, pretty poor there, the 18th in the league. Opposition score 54.7%. You can round that off to 55%. 55% of the time they had success in scoring at least a touchdown. So, I mean, that is pitiful, man. That's pretty bad. So, again, I mean, Mr. Kamara is definitely a fine play here. I think he's the first choice. And, again, when I go to running backs, I forgot to mention, like I said, I prefer to pay down on quarterbacks. And I feel the same as far as tight ends and defenses. I'd rather always play, at least for me, as far as a GPP player. I definitely love paying up for running backs on given weeks, and especially that we have now so many explosive dual threat running backs. Remember I said before for the quarterbacks, I love dual threat quarterbacks. Well, the same thing applies for running backs. You want to have that option to have a running back that not only runs well between the tackles, can get on the outside and be very explosive, could find his own hole and create, and at the same time be able to be that receiver, that slot position receiver on given time, check down receiver. I mean, and these guys are explosive. If they get themselves open and they spread the floor out, guys like Kamara, guys like Mr. Johnson, guys like Mr. Gordon, Mr. Hunt, these guys are all, Mr. McCaffrey, this young kid here coming in for the Giants, Barkley, even Fournette, they're all dual threat running backs. Can beat you with their feet running as well as with their hands catching and being explosive on the open field. So if you can get yourself one or two of these individuals every single week, it gives you a good chance to have a nice solid base of fantasy points build up among those running backs. So it leads me to my next guy, David Johnson. We know last year had the devastating injury, was out pretty much the entire year after game 1. David Johnson was one of my favorite players in 2016. He was just lights out. He made me some money. I played him about 6 or 7 games throughout the 2016 season, and it was a remarkable season for David Johnson. He comes in here at 8,600. On DK, he's actually more expensive, 8,800. Incredible, 8,800. His 2016 stats, as you can see, no stats here, but I'm going to tell you his stats. 2016, 293 rushes, 1,239 yards, 16 touchdowns. He also had 80 receptions for 879 yards, 4 TDs. All-purpose yards, 2,118 yards, 373 touches. That was number 1 in all-purpose yards that year. He was the 7th leading scorer in the NFL in 2016 with the 1,239 yards. In the red zone in 2016, 73% rushing percentage inside the 20-yard line. He had 58 rushes, 139 yards, and 14 TDs. That improved even more so when he was inside the 10. 35 rushes, 65 yards, 13 TDs. So that means out of the 14 TDs inside the 20, he was more dangerous when he got inside the 10. He had 13 of those there. 79% rushing percentage there. Inside the 5-yard line, I even went a little bit further. 81% in the 5-yard line rushing percentage. 22 rushes, 30 yards, 12 TDs. So even inside the 5, they kept giving the ball to this guy. And that's the one thing out of Alvin Kamara and him, he is capable of being that goal line back, where Kamara, we will have to wait and see. He needs to have that room because he's explosive in finding holes and getting on the outside, Alvin Kamara. So, but definitely 2 very powerful runners here. I say you definitely got to consider David Johnson. He's going up against Washington. Washington was dead last in rushing defense last year. I mean, 134 yards per game given up to backs last year, and they probably didn't see 1 or 2 players similar to Dave Johnson and his abilities. 12 TDs, 4.5 yards per rush against them. They also gave up 80 receptions to the running back, 612 yards total for 4 TDs. FanDuel points generated by running backs against Washington, 23.4 fantasy points per game. That was the 5th worst in fantasy points against running backs. And on DK, 27 fantasy points. That was the 4th worst in the entire league. So, I mean, they're going to have their issues. Washington is definitely in a tough spot here with Mr. DJ. In the red zone, Washington also, their opponents scored 51% of the time, at least a touchdown. So in the red zone, they coughed up at least a touchdown 51% of the time, man. So, again, Mr. DJ David Johnson, definitely someone you should consider in this week's slate. You got some notable, you know, Ezekiel Elliott, Melvin Gordon definitely in good spots as well. I mean, especially Melvin Gordon against the Chargers. But my next guy that I really like is Kareem Hunt, another sophomore. He had an incredible rookie year for Kansas City last year. I definitely think Kareem Hunt is someone to consider in this matchup. Last year, we got him. He had 8,000 on DK. He's a little bit under that, 7,400. Incredible year for him, man. 6th in rushing last year as a rookie. 272 rushes, 1,327 yards with 8 touchdowns. He had an 82.9 rushing yards per game. 82, pretty much 83 rushing yards per game. He also had 53 receptions for 455 yards and 3 touchdowns. Incredible, incredible season for Mr. Hunt. Red zone, inside the red zone, 20-yard line. He was 4th in the league, 69.2%. He had 36 rushes for 102 yards with 5 touchdowns. That's a 69% rushing percentage. That was 4th in the league. Incredible. Versus he has played. They played against the Chargers last year. In the last game against the Chargers, 24 rushes, 155 yards, 1 touchdown. He also had 7 receptions for 51 yards. All right, with 1 touchdown, 36 fantasy points. 36. They're right here. As you can see that here. In game 1, you can see here 17 rushes, 172 yards, and 1 touchdown. He had also 1 catch for 11 yards, 24.8 fantasy points. So he had 2 monster games against LA, against the Chargers. So all that just gives me, you know, check marks. I have to, you know, I really believe that he's going to do okay here as well. There may be some changes they may do to you know, try to, you know, neutralize him, but we'll see. And it's going to be tough because they got a quarterback who's young, who's a dual threat quarterback who can run the ball as well. Same thing with Mr. Hunt. They also got an explosive receiver in Mr. Hill. Kansas City definitely has some firepower in their offensive arsenal. So Mr. Kareem Hunt is definitely someone to consider. The Chargers, he averaged 17.8 fantasy points, pretty much away from home. He what do you got here? I got him at 87.4 yards per game. At home, he was averaging 74.4 yards per game, and he put up 17 to 18 fantasy points, which is above value, above his average. And he's capable, as you can see. He can get you 30. He's capable of getting at least, I would say, you could possibly get him in the 20. He even had a 43 spot here. Awesome, awesome year. So he's capable of getting you 30. So he has good upside. I really like him here. I think he's in a good, favorable matchup. Chargers coming in. They're 31st in the league in the NFL in rushing, giving up 131 yards per game. They're 14th in the league in giving up as far as running backs getting receptions on them. 88 receptions for 665 yards, man. That's a lot. 665, 2 TDs, 25.8 DK points given up, 2 running backs, and 21.5 fantasy points on FanDuel. In the red zone, the Chargers, lowest percentage of TDs scored out of all the teams that we're going to discuss today. They were actually pretty decent in the red zone, but I'm still not buying it. I still like Kareem Hunt. In the red zone NFL, they were 36% of the time teams scored on them, so they were the best at that. We'll give them that much for San Diego, for LA Chargers. But I still love Mr. Kareem Hunt here. So I would say pencil in Mr. Kareem Hunt if you want to in those options. You got 3 backs there. I'm actually going to give you another back here. I definitely like, watch out for Fournette. McCaffrey, I'll probably touch base on these guys a little bit more. Dalvin Cook, there's a lot of good running backs in pretty decent spots. My next guy that I really think is in a great position is Alex Collins. I like Alex Collins here. He's 6,700. On DK, he's 5,600. Last year, he had 212 rushes, 973 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 4.6 yards per carry. 23 receptions, 187 yards, 8.4 yards per catch, which is not a bad average. He pretty much had about 66, 67 yards per game. His home-away splits at home, he had 118 rushes, 575 yards, 72.4 yards per game with 4 touchdowns. He pretty much averaged about 12 to 13 fantasy points, and As you can see here, his average for the year was 10.6. You know, pretty much rounded off to 11. So he obviously went. He obviously had above average there, and he has the potential. As you can see here, he is capable of getting you at least 20. So he has a little bit of upside from that 12 or 13, from that 10 spot to get possibly 20 is not too bad. That's definitely a nice value play right there, even though he's at 6,700. If he can get you 20, 25, that'll be awesome. In the red zone, inside the 20, 27 rushes, 114 yards, 6 TDs. His rushing percentage was 33%. Inside the 10, he was rushed for 12 times for 33 yards with 4 TDs. So he basically had 4 TDs inside the 20 from inside the 10, actually, and 30% rushing percentage. I really, really like him here. Really do like him here. Going up against Buffalo. Buffalo's 29th in the league in rushing defense last year, 124.6 yards per game. They gave up 18 TDs. Also coughed up 90 receptions to running backs, 665 yards with 2 touchdowns. FanDuel points, 25.4 FanDuel points per game. That was the worst in the NFL. The worst. DK, 29.1 fantasy points per game. That was also the highest in the NFL. So Buffalo is a good spot for Mr. Collins. Red zone defense, Buffalo was 16th worst in the league, coughing up almost 53.5% success rate to the opposition. So at least you know, as far as in the red zone, 54% of the time pretty much they coughed up at least a touchdown. Incredible numbers, man. Next, so that's, you know, so again, man, I love Alex Collins here, man. I think he's definitely in a fine position as well. We could touch more on some of these plays tomorrow in the live show at 7 p.m. My next guy, I'm actually going to give you another running back that I really like a lot tomorrow on Sunday. I love Carlos Hyde here, man, against Pittsburgh for Cleveland. Cleveland is a much improved team, and Cleveland last year played Pittsburgh probably the toughest out of any of the teams. They lost 2 close games to Pittsburgh last year, 28-24 and 21-18. And this is without Carlos Hyde, without Tyrod Taylor, without Josh Gordon, healthy, I think, for one of them, and without Mr. Landry that they just picked up in a trade from Miami. They're a new improved offense. I think this is going to be something else. I think Pittsburgh could find themselves. One thing's for sure, I'm going to tell you here, and I'm sure you're going to hear it in other places, but if you're here at DFS Zone, the Cleveland Browns will not go 0-16. They will not. They will win some games this year. With that offense, and their defense is improving slowly but surely. The defense wasn't horrific, so they will have some improvement there. But Carlos Hyde and company, these guys are going to be a bit better on offense. That's for sure. Last year with the 49ers, Carlos Hyde was 13th in the league in rushing, 240 rushing yards, 940 total yards, 4 yards per carry, had also 8 TDs. He averaged about 60 yards per game. His home and away splits last year with the 49ers at home, he had 130 rushes, 462 yards, 58 yards per game, 3 touchdowns. Also receives the ball fairly well from the backfield as well. So he's capable. He's not an explosive dual threat back, but he's capable of getting out in the flats and on checkdowns and get some passes. 36 receptions, 206 yards, 26 yards per game. He put up about 15, 16 fantasy points at home last year. So if he can do that here for Cleveland this year, we will gauge it more better as we get through the first 3 or 4 games of the season. Remember, folks, these stats are all from last year. It's the start of a new season. And within the next 3 to 4 weeks, I'll be able to put that information of the 3 or 4 weeks, and we'll have a better gauge of more or less where these players are at going in further into the season, as well as utilizing some of the stats from 2017. All right, so keep that, bear that in mind. All right. So yeah, in the red zone, Mr. Carlos Hyde, 41. Oh, so again, 15 to 16 fantasy points. That's above his average, as you can see, almost 13 a game, and he averaged 15 or 16 on the road at home. So if he can do that here at home and get acclimated at Cleveland right away, he will be a fine play here at 5,900. He has the capabilities of getting you. I would say he's capable of getting you 20. As you can see, he did it once, but he's more of a 15. I would say he's more of Yeah, he's capable of getting you maybe 15 to 17 fantasy points, which is definitely above his average. I think he's capable of doing that. He has a little bit more upside than that. He got 21 here and pretty much 23 here against San Francisco. So they might be a possibility, you know. So, yeah, Mr. Carlos Hyde, definitely someone to consider, okay? Going up against Pittsburgh in the red zone, 41 rushes, 67 yards, 8 touchdowns. He did very well in the red zone. Another guy, and one of the reasons why I also put a check mark next to him and I decided that he would be a fine play is that he is very good in the red zone. 8 TDs, 61% rushing percentage in the red zone. Inside the 10, 28 rushes, 34 yards, 8 touchdowns. So that means inside the 20, all his touchdowns came from inside the 10. 71.8% rushing percentage. It went up at a complete 10%. That is awesome. He's going up against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, respectively, a decent defense on both sides of the ball as far as defense and offense, pass defense and rushing defense. 10th in rushing defense last year, not bad at all, but did give up a few big games to a few backs last year, so they're capable of doing it. And like I said, the new improved defense, the new improved offense for Cleveland. I'm not going to bear it on that. I think that they faced last year a team that is not the same team on offense, and they gave them 2 good games. If they're capable of putting these guys in positions to be successful, in Mr. Hyde, Tyrod Taylor, Mr. Landry, and as well as Josh Gordon, they're gonna be fine. There's a possibility that they can have their first win of the year in an upset over Pittsburgh. Okay? Pittsburgh in the red zone, second to last year. That's a big area that I saw that I didn't like, and more of a reason for me to like Carlos Hyde because he's very good in the red zone. Pittsburgh was second to last in the whole entire NFL in the red zone. They really had trouble stopping teams when they got inside the 20. 65.9%, almost 66% of the time opponents got in the red zone, they scored a touchdown. In the last 3 games of last year, that percentage jumped all the way up to 89%. They had some issues late in the year last year. So again, one of all the reasons why I like Carlos Hyde, very, very good inside the 20. Pittsburgh struggles inside the 20 defending opponents. So that's where I'm at. So that's where I'm at as far as running backs, man. I gave you a couple of nice plays there. We're going to go over to the receivers. And the receivers, the first receiver I am looking at for Sunday, obviously Antonio Brown is in play, guys, 9,000. DeAndre Hopkins, they're both in favorable positions where they could be successful. But my first guy I really like because I like their quarterback, you got to team him up, is Michael Thomas. 8,500. Again, you could pay up on receivers and on running backs. I prefer to go that route. Majority of the time I go that route. Again, I do multiple lineups. You can go with a stud quarterback if you wanted to, if you found some good value at running back or possibly at one of your receiver positions. But Michael Thomas, 8,500 here on DK, 7,800. Last year he had 109 receptions, 1,156 yards. He had a 69.8, pretty much a 70% catch percentage. All right, they targeted him 149 times, so he definitely got a lot of throws his way. He was the 3rd leading receiver in the NFL, averaged about 9 targets a game, which I really, really like. I look for that as far as targets. That's very important. Okay, his home and away splits at home, he had 55 receptions for 693 yards. He averaged 12.6 yards per catch and 77 yards per game. He also had 2 touchdowns. He did a little bit better on the road, but we're not going to worry about that. Versus Tampa Bay, he played them in the last game. He had 8 targets, 6 receptions, 94 yards, 15.7 yards per catch. In game 1, he had 11 targets, 8 receptions, 65 yards. Not too bad at the games. His fantasy, he put up in those games about 16 fantasy points. That is exceeding, obviously, his average for the year. So 12.9, which pretty much is 13. And as you can see, he's capable of getting you close to 20 or better. So I would think he's a 17 and 19 fantasy point, receiver with the potential to get you 20 or better, which he did here once, twice, 2 times last year. So I like Mr. Thomas in this freaking matchup here against his very, very poor defensive pass defense team in Tampa Bay. In the red zone, he was pretty good as well. Inside the 20, 16 targets, 9 receptions, 51 yards, 5 TDs. Okay, his catch percentage was 56%. Inside the 10, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 30 yards, 5 TDs. So again, another player who inside the 10 is a little bit more efficient than inside the 20. He had a 77% catch percentage, so you know he's going to be targeted in that area inside the 10. So I definitely love Michael Thomas there. Tampa Bay, as far as defense, man, pass defense, they were dead last, as I mentioned before when I discussed Mr. Breeze. 261 yards per game given up. Opponents had 220 receptions against them. 170 yards per game against them with 16 touchdowns. FanDuel points against receivers was one of the worst, actually the worst in the NFL. The receivers against Tampa Bay put up 39.5 DK points per game. The worst, and probably the highest number out of all the positions. So again, it gives you an idea where you should target. Running backs get big numbers. Wide receivers put up big fantasy numbers. And as you can see here, the wide receivers here, and I'm sure for some others that if I would have targeted some others, those numbers would be pretty high as well. 39.5 fantasy points per game, DK points against versus receivers. Receivers also put up 31.4 fantasy points per game on FanDuel. All right. Red zone, opponents put up 55%. You can round it off. 54.7. I'll round that off to 55%. 55% of the time, the opponents got to the red zone, scored a touchdown on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You know, so I mean, Michael Thomas, MT, is definitely in play for me. Definitely someone you guys should consider up here in the top tier players. I also like AJ Green, man. I think AJ Green, good spot again. I told you about Andy Dalton. You got to pair him up with somebody, so you're going to have to go with AJ Green for Cincinnati. I think they're in a favorable spot here. He's at 8,400. DK, he's at 7,300. Last year, he had 75 receptions, 1,078 yards. He had about 14.4 yards per catch, which is not too bad. Had 143 targets, averaged about 8 targets per game. Definitely like to see that. We'll love to see maybe 9 or 10 in this particular game. 52.4% catch percentage. He had 67.4 yards per game receiving. At home, 32 receptions. Well, he's actually on the road. So on the road, his splits, sorry. On the road, 32 receptions, 433 yards, 135 yards. 13.5 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns. He did average about 13 to 14 fantasy points between FanDuel and DK. 11, 8, that's pretty much rounded off to 12. So he was averaging 12. Definitely met his average. It actually exceeded his average, so he's above average. And he has some upside as well. If we go here a little and look at him a little further, has some down games towards the end of the year. But as you can see, 23 here, 20 here, 26 here, 22 here. He did 20 or better 4 times. And overall, I think he's capable of getting you anywhere between 13 to 16 fantasy points, which is above his average. And I think in this matchup here, not too bad of a position for him. You know, inside of 20, pretty efficient as well. 7 receptions, 72 yards, 6 touchdowns. He had a 43% catch percentage there. Inside the 20, inside the 10, only 4 receptions. Don't really like those numbers in particular, but I like the matchup against Indy. 4 receptions, 33 yards, 4 TDs, so it was good. He had 4 receptions, and all 4 of them were touchdowns, so that was pretty good. Going up against Indianapolis, man, 28th in pass defense last year. Opponents averaged 247 yards per game against them, and he coughed up 23 touchdowns. In the red zone, opponents scored at least 52.9% of the time in the red zone. I mean, you know, they were just horrific there. And also, they're not a good pass rushing team, so definitely an opportunity for Andy Dalton to sit back there and look for guys like A.J. Green, second to last in sacks last year. So that is definitely something that helps the whole idea of actually even having Andy Dalton as a possible play here in this game. In the red zone, like I said, pretty much 53% in the red zone. Opponents score touchdowns. DK fantasy points per game to receivers, 33.8. 33.8 fantasy points in the top 4. And then FanDuel, 27.4 fantasy points per game given up to wide receivers. Definitely Mr. Green, someone you should be considering. My next play here at wide receiver, there's a lot of guys. Again, I'll touch on some of these tomorrow. I like Keenan Allen here as well, but I'm going to bypass him. Odell obviously is always someone you can consider at 7,800. You know how dangerous and how explosive he can be. Mr. Adam Thielen could be someone to consider. At 7,600. He had a fantastic year last year. Just to go through him a little bit, he averaged 12 fantasy points per game, as you can see there. But he could get you 20 or better. He's not my next play, but he's someone that I'm definitely looking at even further. I will touch base more on him tomorrow. But he has the potential to get you 20 or better, so he has some upside. Not explosive upside. Explosive upside for me would be someone that is going to, excuse me, sorry about that. That will be someone that obviously will be able to put 20 or better, multiple times. He's only did it a few times last year, but he was definitely an integral part of the offense, and that's the one thing I definitely like. He did have 142 targets and 91 receptions, put up 1,276 yards, so I take that into consideration. 79.8 yards per game and 4 TDs. He had a 64% catch ratio, so I kind of like that. And his home and away splits are not too bad. At home, 54 receptions, 739 yards, with 13.7 yards per catch. So, and he averaged 15 to 16 fantasy points per game at home, which is above his average. So, I mean, someone to consider, and then to know that they're going up against San Francisco, was the 22nd worst defense defending the pass, giving up 235 yards per game, and they were nearly 60% in coughing up touchdowns in the red zone. So, Mr. Thielen is someone in play, as well as Mr. Diggs. I said, Mr. Hill here. He could be a potential play. Smith-Schuster here for Pittsburgh in a good spot. Mr. Hogan, but I'm going all the way down. I like Landry here as well. It's just unfortunate. There's a lot of plays. Again, that's why multiple lineups will be something you can consider. But the plays I'm giving you are really sound plays. Definitely players you should consider. I am looking for, where is my next guy? My next guy is right here, Danny Amendola. Mr. Amendola. 5,100. Love Danny Amendola here. He's going to be a key factor in this Miami offense as far. He's a nice slot receiver, very tough, capable of making almost every catch. He's just tough as nails, man. He's a scrap iron. So these are the kind of guys. He comes with a winning pedigree, being over there with Belichick, being with probably the best quarterback ever in the NFL and Tom Brady for many years. He's going to bring a lot of experience to this team. I really think that DA is going to be in a spectacular position here to do well. We're going to see. I think he's going to be a fine play for this Sunday. We'll see how it progresses over the course of 3 or 4 games. But I think he's going to be someone that they're going to target quite a bit. Last year's his numbers 64. He had 60. Well, his numbers here 5,100 here, 4,200 in DK. So he's got a decent price tag on both sites. 61 receptions last year, 659 yards, about 11 yards per catch. He did have 2 TDs. He was targeted 86 times. He had a 70% catch percentage. His home and away splits, I kind of bypassed those. I mean, he did pretty well at home. In the red zone, he was targeted 12 times last year inside the 20. He had 10 receptions, 54 yards and 2 touchdowns, 83% catch ratio there. Inside the 10, he had 4 receptions, 10 yards, and 2 TDs, 100% catch ratio, obviously. So, I mean, he had 4 targets and he had 4 receptions, so he did very well. He's very good in the red zone. We've seen it happen over the years. We've seen how dangerous he can be when he was with the Patriots inside that area. So I really like him there. He averaged 7.2 fantasy points last year, so not a whole lot, but he does have upside. He's capable of getting you 15, 16. As you can see, his last 3 games last year, I mean, granted, that was with New England and, of course, probably the greatest quarterback ever in Tom Brady. It's a totally different story when he goes now to Ryan Tannehill. But it doesn't mean that if he builds that chemistry with Tannehill, I saw him play I saw a few highlights of him doing very well with Miami in the preseason with Tannehill. I think they're starting to get a feel for one another. This could be, a game where he could put up, 12 to 13, 14 fantasy points for that price, and for him to exceed his average, I think is very much possible in this game. So I really, really like him here. And he's going up against Tennessee, man. Tennessee, 25th in the league in passing defense last year. They gave up 193 receptions to receivers, 2,286 yards, 142.8 yards per game, and 17 TDs. DK points given up to receivers. They were in the top 10, worst in that category. 34 DK fantasy points per game Tennessee gave up to receivers. And on FanDuel, 26.9. In the red zone, Tennessee, 54.6% of the time opponents scored on them a TD. It even was worse during the course of the last 3 games last year. Another reason why I really penciled in Amendola. The last 3 games last season for Tennessee, they gave up 88.6%. Pretty much 89% of the teams out of those 3 games that the team reached, the opposition reached the red zone, they scored a touchdown. That is just like they didn't even have an answer. So we'll see how that pans out for them this week. They do have to. And another thing also is that Amendola is playing at home in Miami, and I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt that Miami will play better at home. Granted, Tennessee is not a bad football team. I still think Tennessee will probably win this game. But Miami, if Amendola goes out and he gets 7 or 8 or 10 targets and puts up, a good 15 fantasy points, I mean, that would be fantastic. So Danny Amendola is someone I'm considering. And like I said, I do have worthy mentions on Thielen and, of course, the other gentleman that I mentioned to you. Let's go over to the tight ends. The TEs, man. Obviously, Gronkowski and Kelsey are definitely the best tight ends going into the slate on Sunday. These guys are going to get touches. They're going to get some. They're going to be targeted quite a bit. Gronkowski especially. New England, Houston was one of those teams that were pretty poor defending against tight ends. So I can see that happening. The Chargers are not a bad pass defense team. I think they have trouble more against the run. And I can see Kelsey still getting those rests because he's just such a tough guy, man. He's like Gronkowski, but even more like furious in a way. So, Travis, Kelsey, these 2 guys are in play. I'm not going to fade those guys because, again, I'm a kind of GPP player that I just don't really pay up for these kind of players as well as quarterbacks, tight ends and quarterbacks, unless it's like a 2-game slate or some smaller slate. But mainly a main slate like this, 10, 12 games or better, there's so much value. There's so many possible plays that you got to give yourself the opportunity to take the best player in a position. And I think the best plays with the most upside as far as fantasy points is at running back, especially now with these dual threat running backs and those wide receivers that are very explosive that can put up 15 to 20 or better fantasy points. Those are the ones you want to target. All right, so look for value at tight end. So when I look at value here, the first guy I really like the most is not tremendous value, but from 79 to 59, I love Kyle Rudolph here. Kyle Rudolph, and I'm going to tell you some reasons why. 5,900, he's at 5,900 here and 4,500 on DK. Last season, he had 57 receptions for 532 yards. He had 8 touchdowns. For a tight end, that is fantastic. 34 yards per game. He had a 70.4% catch percentage. He had 81 targets, and he caught 57 passes. His home and away splits, 29 receptions at home, 260 yards, 29 yards per game. He had only 7.5 fantasy points, but as you can see, 7.5 fantasy points is slightly below his average for the year. But he can get you better numbers. He could get you as much as 11, possibly higher than that. He got a 20 spot here. He got a 13 spot here. He's capable, in my opinion, he's capable of getting you anywhere between 10 to about 14 fantasy points if he gets targeted. And I believe he's going to get targeted because San Francisco was one of those teams last year. They gave up a lot of touchdowns to tight ends. They had their issues. They're one of the top maybe 7 or 8 teams in the league that had trouble with tight ends. And I could just see, and not only that, this gentleman here, in the red zone, he was just absolutely dynamic. Was one of the best in the NFL in the red zone as any receiver. Inside of 20, 16 targets, 14 receptions. 16 targets, 14 receptions for a tight end that normally only gets 7.5 fantasy points per game. That comes to show you that he's targeted the most when he's in the red zone. When Minnesota's in the red zone, they love this guy there. Why? Because he's a big, strong target, got good hands, runs with the ball well, doesn't fumble. That's the reason why, guys. So 14 receptions, 92 yards, 6 touchdowns, 87% catch percentage. 87%. Inside of 10, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 31 yards, 4 TDs, 88% catch percentage. So out of the 6 TDs and within the 20, when he got to the 10, he was even more explosive. He got 4 touchdowns from there. I love it. And then the matchup is good. San Francisco, 22nd in the league last year in pass defense, gave up 235 yards per game. Titans had 67 receptions against this defense, 580 yards and 8 touchdowns. And he had 8 touchdowns himself, so that's another red flag there telling me, hey, you know what? Check mark. 10.8 fantasy points per game on DK and 8.6 fantasy points per game to tight ends on FanDuel. Okay. In the red zone, San Francisco opposition scored 59.6, nearly 60% of the time. They were in the bottom tier of the league in the red zone. Another reason why I decided I love Mr. Randolph in this situation. He is targeted better. He is utilized more in the red zone. Minnesota should be able to move the ball. They're also at home, and they're facing a team that had issues in the red zone and had issues throughout the year versus tight ends. So 60%, the last 3 games of the year, in the red zone, the opponents scored 70% of the time. So it actually increased by 11%. And tight ends, and again, like I said, they scored 8 touchdowns. Tight ends scored 8 touchdowns. Yes, 8 touchdowns against this team last year. So, I mean, definitely the reasons why I love Mr. Kyle Randolph. Kyle Randolph, excuse me, Mr. Rudolph. Mr. Rudolph. All right, my next tight end. It's probably a little bit of a sneaky play. I mean, again, I try to find. There's a couple guys I skipped that I obviously played. Delaney Walker going up against Miami. Miami definitely struggled with tight ends, giving up about 10 touchdowns a game to tight ends. So Mr. Walker, he'll be someone I'll probably touch on a little bit more tomorrow. Coming down here, of course, I took Mr. Rudolph. You got Jack Doyle had a very good year last year, possibly here. Cincinnati definitely has had issues with tight ends as well. Mr. Tyler Effort is back after injury. He may be someone to consider here against Indy. Then when I come down here to the bottom, my next guy is Mr. Jesse James for Pittsburgh, going up against Cleveland. Jesse James, 4,600. On DK, he is 2,700. He's a bargain on DK. 2,700. He had 43 receptions last year for Pittsburgh, 372 yards with 3 touchdowns. He was targeted 63 times, so he does get his share of throws. And I believe in this game tomorrow with no Le'Veon Bell, there's a possibility that they're going to spread this offense out a little bit among Mr. Brown and everybody else in company. And Mr. James going up against Cleveland, who really struggles against tight ends. I mean, Cleveland has had their issues. They're one of those teams in the top 5 or 6 that had issues with tight ends, and this is a good spot just due to that Jesse James may be able to have a fairly decent game here. He had 23 yards per game with 3 TDs, and like I said, and away from home, his home and away splits, 14 receptions, not a whole lot, 155 yards, 2 touchdowns, though, in 14 receptions, kind of like that. He was targeted 22 times. He averaged about 5 to 6 fantasy points per game, which is about his average. But he is capable of getting you at least 10 to 14, as you can see here. 14 here against Baltimore and 10 here against Tennessee. And he had a 19 spot in game 1 against Cleveland. So there you go. And he's facing Cleveland again. Second time around with Cleveland, he only put up 1.9, but he did put 19 in game 1. So I like him as a very sneaky tight end play. It's a very cheap price guy who might not be at all highly owned at all. So definitely in both sites, in both platforms, DK or FanDuel. In the red zone, 5 receptions, 30 yards, 3 TDs. 5 receptions, 3 TDs. Not too bad. 41% catch percentage inside the 10, 3 receptions, 7 yards, 3 TDs. So he gets targeted in the end zone quite a bit. So where does it stand? How does that fare with Cleveland? Cleveland struggles against tight ends. All right. Tight ends had 89. Well, let's get first. Cleveland is not too bad on defense, but on pass defense, 19th in the league. Gave up 230 yards and 28 touchdowns, which is one of the tops in the league, top 10 in touchdowns given up to opponents. as far as receiving is concerned. 28 touchdowns. Tight ends had 89 receptions for 868 yards and 10 touchdowns. That's the third highest against tight ends in the NFL. So this is the reasons why I pinpoint. And also watching Jesse James, he played fairly well in the playoffs. They've robbed him of that freaking catch in the end zone, which was horrific. I can never forget that. But in the red zone, again, as far as DK fantasy points, 14.8 fantasy points to tight ends. Cleveland this year, last year, and 11.9 on FanDuel. That is pretty high, and that's above, as you can see, his average. So chances are there is an opportunity for him to get 10 or 11, or like I said, as much as 14 fantasy points because of the defensive play of Cleveland. Now, if they play better defense, chances are he'll be a bust, but I got a feeling that he's going to get some touches, and he should be able to do fairly well here. In the red zone, Cleveland, dead last in the NFL. Another reason why I like Mr. Jess James. 67% of the opponents, 67% of the time the opponents got in the red zone, they scored a touchdown. In the last 3 games of the season last year for Cleveland, they averaged 62%, was slightly a little bit better than the last game for the year against opponents. They did slightly a little better, but still 62%. That is way too high. So Jesse James, definitely someone in play for me, and I definitely think you guys should consider him as well. I have one more guy that I'll discuss before I move on, and my next guy is, I kind of like, if I can find him. I passed him, sorry. He's in the same area. Right here, Austin Severian-Jenkins for Jacksonville. Going against up to the Giants. As you know, the Giants are pretty poor defensively, and they're pretty poor defending against tight ends as well. 4,600. Don't know a price for him on DK because I went on DK yesterday and I didn't see his name at all on there. So maybe it will be updated by tomorrow night. But 4,600, I would think he's about the same price or lower on DK. He averaged about 6. Last year, his numbers, he played for my Jets because I'm from New York. I'm a Jet fan. Sorry to say so, but he played for the Jets last year. And 50 receptions, 668 yards, 3 TDs, 48 yards per game. He did have 90 targets, but man, that is horrible conversion rate. Only had a 55.6% catch percentage. He did average 5.9 fantasy points per game, but he's capable in a good, favorable position against a team like the Giants. He could get you 9 to 10, and I can see him getting anywhere even as high as 11 or 12. He is capable of it, so he has a little upside, which is about 6 fantasy points better. In the red zone, not good due to the fact that, he played for the Jets. Fortunately, it's hard to just, it's just, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He played for the Jets, and unfortunately, in the red zone, they didn't utilize him enough, and unfortunately, the Jets didn't get to the red zone a whole lot. So those are the reasons why his numbers are not good there, but I do like him here versus the matchup with the Giants because the Giants are poor defensively against the pass as well as defending against tight ends, and these are the numbers that we're looking at. The Giants gave up 78 receptions to tight ends last year for 923 yards, nearly 1,000 yards on tight ends, and they coughed up 12 touchdowns to tight ends. Now, remember I said earlier, they had coughed up when I read out to you Blake Bortles' numbers. 32 touchdowns by the Giants, the highest in the NFL, 32, and 12 of them came from tight ends, which is the highest in the NFL versus tight ends. They were dead last, as I mentioned before, with Blake Bortles, 31st in the league in pass defense, giving up 252 yards per game. DK points, 15.3 DK fantasy points per game versus tight ends, and 12.6 FanDuel points. In the red zone, 55% of the time, teams scored in the red zone. In the last 3 games of last year, the Giants gave up 70%. So they were pitiful in the last 3 games of the year. 70% of the opponents in the red zone scored a touchdown. I mean, and again, like I mentioned, they gave up the most touchdowns to tight ends. So I am all in favor of Mr. Severian-Jenkins. So that's pretty much where I'm at as far as the players. I'm trying to remember here who were my defenses here. And I just don't find that information. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see if I can find. Missed my defense. All right, well, let's go over the defenses real quickly. So on defense, I'm favoring, myself personally, I'm favoring the Saints. I think that they are fine play defensively this coming week. If you are willing to pay up for a defense, it's not much of a difference in variation. I have no problem with going up with Baltimore, who put up 11, 12 fantasy points last year. You know, so Baltimore in a favorable position with against Buffalo. They have had moments where they put 20 or better, so they have had games where they could give you 20, and I think they have more of those than anybody else. But I am in favor of the Saints against Tampa Bay, because Tampa Bay is so bad with their offense. I could just see them trying to open up the floor with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and man, it could be brutal if they can get to him. Not only that, New Orleans definitely had good. They were one of the decent pass defending teams as far as sacks are concerned, as far as a pass rush. So I can see them pressurizing, giving some pressure to Mr. Ryan Fitzpatrick. Can't believe I misplaced that information regarding the defenses. Give me one moment here. See if I can find that. But nonetheless, because I already had done the research on it, it would have been good to give you that information. And for whatever reason, I just misplaced it. But again, I love New Orleans tomorrow. On Sunday. And obviously, I'm all in favor of all the better defenses, Ravens, Jaguars. I mean, if you're looking for value, play down real cheap as far as defenses, I would say the only one that I can consider, that I would probably consider, is probably, tough to say, man. Yeah, I don't see anybody. For me, I when it comes to defenses, I really try to pay up a little bit and stay with one of the better ones depending on matchups. And I think Baltimore, Jacksonville against with the Giants, even though the Giants are a little improved on offense, they got OBJ back, and then they got the young kid Barkley. So then we'll have to wait and play it out and see how well they do there. So that's why I'm willing to skip the Jaguars. But I think I could see Baltimore doing well against Buffalo. Turns over the ball quite a bit. They do have a good runner in McCoy. Denver getting up against Seattle. I'm not too fond of them there. I mean, Seattle still, got Russell Wilson. I like the Saints the best there. And I think Minnesota is definitely in a good spot with San Francisco. I like Cincinnati, too. I think Cincinnati here against Indy would be a nice possible play. I think that's the cheapest one that I will go. As you know, I already took Andy Dalton. 6.4 fantasy points. You don't need a whole lot. If you can get 10 out of a defense or 15, that'll be awesome at that price. And they did 10 to 14 at least 3 times last year. Got close to it 9 times. I like the factors that Indy, I think that Cincinnati, their pass rush is pretty good, and Indianapolis, as far as defending the pass rush, is not that good. I remember that much when I did the research, so I kind of like them too. But I think you won't go wrong with Baltimore. You can't go wrong with Jacksonville. Definitely Baltimore the better play. I love New Orleans. I think I'll be on New Orleans. I definitely think the Vikings are someone to consider, and I definitely like Cincinnati. That'll probably be the second team I'll put on my majority of my lineups. But again, if you did well with deciding on a mid-tier quarterback and saved on quarterback and paid up for running backs and wide receivers, and you paid down on tight end, you could probably pay up here for a defense, a solid defense that can give you some good numbers. Whatever I missed out today, I'll definitely share tomorrow. I definitely had that information as far as the defense, and I don't find it here among my stats, which I'm very disappointed about. But nonetheless, guys, that's pretty much it, man. That's where I'm at, and this is pretty much the way it's going to work. I'm always going to give you 2 or 3 plays, possibly 4. As you can see in some areas, I gave you 4 plays. There are going to be some more that I'm going to cover again tomorrow. Again, guys, drop a like on the video, man. I really, really appreciate it. It definitely helps the channel. I hope my WNBA viewers are with me writing it out. They told me they'll be here for the NFL, so I'm looking forward to speaking with you guys tomorrow on the live show. And actually, I probably will be doing a live show tonight just for the heck of it for the WNBA. So anybody still playing WNBA, you can come and check me out later on tonight. I'll do that before the slate begins. I don't recall what time it is, but it'll be an hour before lock. o'clock. I think it's a 7 o'clock start the game, or 8 o'clock. If it's 8 o'clock, it'll be 7, and if it's 7 o'clock, it'll be 6. So if anybody's a new viewer and wants to at least check out more or less how I go about my live show, you can definitely come out and take a look at the WNBA live show tonight. Other than that, NFL live show will be tomorrow, definitely at 7 p.m. Carry it on to about 8:15, maybe even 8:30 if I'm having fun with it, and just have a nice time, discuss the slate, and hopefully put everybody in position, including myself as well as you guys, in position to do well on Sunday and hopefully take down and make some serious money. Again, also new followers, new viewers. I do the NBA as well, so I'll be carrying on to the NBA right after NFL. 6 weeks from now, wherever it is, 5 weeks from now, the NBA starts. I'll be doing that as well. A lot of stuff going on here at DFS Zone. Hope you guys join the family. You know, become a zoner, and of course, let's get it. And before I let you guys go, again, drop a like on the video, man. Any comments down below, you can. I'll be more than happy to get back to you. I also have a Facebook group. Most importantly, the Facebook group. Go to DFS Zone, join the group, or like the page. I have an Instagram. All that information will be down in the description box of the video. And also, I have a DFS Zone NFL League. So anybody's interested in that, I think we have some spots available. It's a 20-man, 20-player tournament all season long, 16 games into the playoffs as well. I plan to have the top 6 teams go into the playoffs, and at the end of the year, I will give a DFS Zone winner a prize. That's a $5 entry. It's a commitment, $5 a week. You make your lineup. You can make some money on Sundays, build your bankroll. At the same time, you're having a little fun with other players within the DFS community here in our channel, and at the same time also have the opportunity at the end of the year to be in the playoffs, and if you win, there will be a prize for that individual. Don't know what that is yet, but it will be something nice to give away to someone who is a winner. So guys, stay tuned, man. I hope you liked the video. Again, drop a like, drop a sub, and I'll see you guys, WNBA, I'll see you guys later on tonight, hour before lock, and the NFL guys, I'll see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock for the live show.